for our next interview, I want to bring on somebody that you all know from a different part of what we're going to discuss today, which is Stani, who is the founder of Aave. You may all know Aave as a DeFi app that you've all used in the past few years. From the early ETHLend days to what Aave is now, we've seen a massive evolution on how this ecosystem has been shaped. But what we're going to talk about today is how do we think about the future of consumer applications in Web3? And that is specifically talking about Web3 social networks and decentralized media. It's a very hot topic because there's a lot of things that we're seeing in the Web2 world that we want to change to improve or we're seeing not being done right, to the opportunity that we get to actually think about ownership, governance, and a better sense of community and belonging into our Web3 ecosystem. And that's where Lens comes in. We're going to talk about how the protocol works, why we decided to, or he decided to do it, and how he's thinking about all those things as a company and a protocol. So without further ado, please welcome Stani on stage. So Stani, how's Japan so far?
Very good, very good. I have to break my diet, which is not a good diet, but it's going to get only better from here.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. So we're not here to discuss DeFi today. And my first question to you is, tell me about what happened where you wanted to change up all of your time and attention and focus to working on a social network. What was that moment and why Lens?
Well, at some point when the Aave protocol became more decentralized, I found more time. Not necessarily. So it's quite interesting because I've been building decentralized protocols for the past few years now. And I always had an idea that what we're building here in Web3 and what got me into the space is that we're in some ways building a lot of accessibility. So we're using decentralization, the blockchain, smart contracts to build more accessibility for people. And with even back in ETHLend days and during Aave, the vision has been about democratizing finance. So bringing financial opportunities to everyone across the globe with the same equal opportunity and the same transparency. And the work hasn't been done still. So quite a lot of my time goes into Aave, enormous amount of time. And also part of my time goes now to Lens as well. And with Lens, the fascinating part is that it's a different kind of problem to solve. It's about access, but also more about the ownership of your social presence. So we tend to transact. We have now a good transaction layer in finance, in Web3. Still needs a lot of work to be scaled, adopted in normal payments. For example, that we can use stable coins across wherever ETHGlobal has its hackathon next time, for example. But also we do different kind of transactions. Like we also connect in real life. We connect in over online constantly, and we create a lot of value. We create a lot of value online, but we don't have a clear way to actually preserve that value and also attribute that to the content we create, for example. So social for me is an interesting way to solve that problem. So how we can actually change a bit the dynamics where we put the content that we create in a more valuable position and also create network effects where if you are part of the content supply chain that I like to call, where you create the content, how you can actually get that value to yourself and everything else that has inspired you to create something online. And also, how do you preserve those connections that you make online? So it's a different kind of a problem to solve, but I think at Aave and in the Aave companies, and what I try to guide my team is that we have to focus on problems that are big, and we're in some ways in a front line of building Web3, meaning that we have to also find bigger problems and challenges to solve, and that's where kind of like we found that Lens and social networking is where we could actually create more impact as well.
Well, thank you so much for that whole background. I think that helps really set the stage for the rest of the conversation. One thing that I noticed here was that the thing that didn't come up, which usually comes up when we hear about somebody else talking about this problem, is that part of majority of the motivations for somebody to start something as a decentralized network is the risk of being deplatformed. Is that because you just didn't emphasize it, or because you don't think that's as important compared to all the other pieces of value and identity and capturing the essence of a social interaction?
I couldn't stop staring your Go socks. We actually have matching socks.
That was not planned.
That's a Go sock. So, I think the deplatforming isn't really that big of an issue. So we kind of like make an issue out of it because decentralization solves a lot of that, some of these parts. So for example, when you have a permissionless access or decentralized protocol, these protocols doesn't look into your backgrounds when you are interacting, but I don't really see that the deplatforming as a kind of like a big challenge to solve. It's something that is solvable in an open network. So as an open network, you can create an environment where anyone can actually participate, and it's up to some sort of like a middleware or algorithms to find what is a high signal and what is valuable to surface to the rest of the users. So, and the deplatforming might be an issue to some extent because we aren't using that many platforms online. Everything has been very concentrated. And I think that's a good thing about Web2 as well. Like we tend to think of that Web2 social is a kind of like a big bad thing. But what Web2 social did, it actually democratized the way to connect with people online and also share information. So Web2 social isn't a bad thing in general. So it really created democratization as well. What I think is more valuable is that how can we go 10 steps further and create a completely open platform, an open network where anyone can actually come and make a pull request into the infrastructure, into the algorithms we create, user front ends. And I think it's just also the way we think about products in Aave in general. So, imagine if you think about most of the products in the world, you really can't go and make a pull request. So you can't go and make a pull request to your iPhone or your Android phone and expect something good to happen after if your idea is good and you fix a problem, right? But what if in the future you can actually build this way protocols, products, and algorithms? And it's possible when you build things in a more open way, built publicly, and everyone has access to contribute.
Oh, that's a really interesting point. So kind of the couple of themes that you just talked about are ownership, kind of governance here. There's a sense of identity, or actually just a proof of identity. Do you see that as different primitives that enable an application, or are those the applications that end up with content and content itself is the end use case?
I really don't have a good answer of what's the particular use case, end use case for Lens, because what we did with Lens Protocol, to explain a bit more, is that we look into how social networking and how social human behavior works. And we took different kinds of artifacts of that. So for example, how people connect, share content, create content, and created a bit more Web3 native way of doing that. We also added some more Web3 native kind of like artifact as well, which is ability to collect the content as well. So collect is a form of appreciation. It might be a form of expressing support. It can be also a form of consuming digital content as well. And there is multiple pieces that actually are valuable from a social networking perspective and content creation that by itself is kind of like a valuable for the future of social media. I personally think one of the most valuable things is the content itself and how the content gets created. So if you think about it today, like we're quite alone in terms of like how we create content online, and how we share, we create tweets, or any kind of content online. Usually it's done by one author. But in the future, you might have a content supply chain where you might have multiple people contributing to the idea, creating that content, participating in the actual production. You might be using an application that provides you good tooling for creating content, and then algorithms that actually also surface that content across multiple applications, and that content gets collected. So what we might see in the future is that we reinforce the idea of, I like to probably use a term like ultrasound content, because it really shows that you can create together something very valuable, but also highlights that everything that you create together, you can also share the value out of it, and monetization, for example.
I guess similar to kind of DeFi, you have a notion of composability built in, and you get to remix and still have everything propagate. Is that a better way of kind of thinking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
And also towards that idea, because the content shouldn't stop into the Lens protocol itself. So what it means is that you should be able to use Lens as a distribution channel of everything you create. So you might be using a NFT platform to create NFTs, a platform you might like, or smart contracts. You should be able to use Lens as well. So you should plug in everything that exists in Web3 into this content chain.
That's an interesting. So could you give us a more direct example of what that means, or what a version of this would look like?
I could imagine that you might be using you might be using a music NFT platform to mint your NFTs, but as a media protocol. But then you notice that maybe all the audience that you have is actually on Lens, and that there's where the distribution is, and maybe algorithms that can surface your content to people that are excited about what you're creating as a user. And in some ways, it means that there's a place to pull everything together. So there's a bit of like a gravity effect, if you think about it, because if you have this place where you can connect the peers, and you have this like a public town squares, you can actually pull all those primitives in Web3 together, and empower. So if there's a place where a lot of music NFTs are created, you can connect them with the Lens protocol to a specific audience as well. So, or it might be about Gitcoin grants. So you will be able to directly give grants through Lens, for example, or like market the grant to an audience.
So it's the social graph that gets to remain constant, and you get to, in a way, propagate messages to this graph.
Yeah, I think so. And the fascinating part is that everything is an open playbook. So today, anyone can go and make a pull request into the protocol, into any of the algorithms, into the user interfaces. If you have something valuable, it really means that you have a really open way to contribute as well into like how these public town squares will look like in the future as well.
From how you've architected this, how do you think about people wanting different things, or people just contradicting priorities with each other, or just disagreeing with some changes? How does the network decide what is considered true or consistent for everybody versus a sub-community?
Yeah, I mean, there's thinking about the Lens protocol itself. There's kind of like a misconception that it's an on-chain protocol because there is a big part of the protocol that is on-chain that brings certain type of guarantees. So things that the users really need is a guarantee that you own the profile. So you have the ownership of what's yours. But also the audience that you create and the follower graph. So you have that ownership as well. Those are simple guarantees that we're using blockchain to provide, but actually where the content is reflected into or where it's located is up to the clients, integrators, and eventually users. And I think we're in a kind of like an interesting position where things are so early that a lot of the community is relying to the actual team, but in the background we're working together with many of the clients, integrators, and community members as well in terms of what kind of changes the protocol could have. But in most cases, you see a lot of the ideas coming directly with a pull requests into the repository, which is quite amazing. Yeah. And but down the line, at some point, yeah. And going back to the discussion about the Lens is actually a set of on-chain primitives and also off-chain primitives for social. So the clients can actually decide which one of the things they want to use for their own use case. And I don't think you don't really need to use everything that Lens has to build a interesting social experience.
What are some off-chain primitives? Like, what are these APIs or features here?
Off-chain primitives, for example, is that where you store the data itself, the content data.
So any client can specify where that destination becomes. Yeah,
exactly. So you can specify the destination. In the future, you can also create a transaction that is a data availability transaction. So it doesn't need to be necessarily on-chain. So you can really cherry pick what do you want to do. And it depends on your use case. Our primary goal is to just create a very unopinionated protocol that is flexible to various of use cases.
No, that is super fascinating. So speaking of an unopinionated protocol, when you were looking into creating this, what did you find other attempts were lacking, whether it's in Web3 or just open source projects or other attempts to make decentralized networks? Why decide to do this yourself instead of either improving something that's out there or using something that's out there?
What we've built with Lens is very unique in the sense that there's been previous attempts on bringing social to more like a Web3 native audience. Steemit is a good example of that, and a bunch of other projects. And I think there's different things that actually has been working, but I think something that we're doing very differently is that we're very thoughtful about even the actual design decisions and how Lens could be integrated. So just giving an example is that even though you can do transactions on chain, you don't really sign those transactions and you don't really pay gas of those transactions. So all the blockchain logic is really abstracted away from the users. And all the content is reflected pretty much right away. So there's a lot of like design choices as well. So it's the first time ever our team has been thinking through the lenses of not only how to build a good protocol, but also how we ensure that people actually will use this and it doesn't feel clunky as an experience. So that's one example. The other example is that we've been curating a Web3 audience. We know that what we're building now should be useful for all of us. And we are all the kind of like a primary citizens of the Lens protocol. Whether it's you're interested in social or DeFi or governance, and down the line, the idea is that we can expand to more new audiences as we can scale with the technology itself. So when you go to Lens, you're talking to a Web3 audience, and what we have done in the beginning is that we've actually, the protocol is still in beta, right? So it has 116,000 profiles, and we try to get new profiles in a slower pace. But what we have done previously, we've allow listed based on Web3 data, who participates in DAOs, decentralized finance, collect NFTs, create NFTs, and are Web3 citizens. And if we can make it work between us first, and we keep continuing improving the experience, we're able to onboard more people as well down the line. And I think that's the path we're going towards. So we've been very focused on who Lens is for now, and what we think it's a Web3 social layer, or maybe more even social layer for Web3. And down the line, if we can actually, if it's useful for us for different use cases, it can be useful for the more bigger audience.
I mean, that'll be a fascinating time to kind of have this actually be mass adopted. I want to switch from decentralized networks to decentralized media. So you talked about a few different types of media contents that are now enabled with the primitives that are built into Lens. Could you give us an example of what new opportunities it creates, whether it's on the monetization or the way people are using it from current user base right now? What's new that they couldn't do before or couldn't do efficiently before in Web 2?
Something interesting about Lens, what's kind of like unique behavior is that people might mint different kinds of NFTs and content and basically create NFTs elsewhere than in Lens, but they come to Lens for that distribution. And as they get used to the platform, they basically start to use it for other use cases. So the Web3 is a connecting point. So people come and talk about Web3, but because everyone has an identity, and that means that you have multiple identities. So you might be talking also about music and other things. In terms of the comparison itself between what's happening on Lens and elsewhere, and especially like in Web3, sort of Web2 social, is that you really have this kind of like an open stream of sharing everything that you create and the value that you can capture. So the monetization plays an interesting role. It's not the primary thing about Lens itself. So I think the primary idea is that content becomes valuable because you have a stake in it. You're vested into a network where you have an audience and you truly own it, and you value that more, and your users value your creativity. But down the line, being able to create content and monetize it directly has been something quite valuable so far. And surprisingly, there's a lot of content that is monetized through Lens with the collects. And I really want to emphasize how interesting the collect feature is, because it just creates an open design space of for monetization, but also what a collect is. And we rarely think about like how we consume content online, because we've used to the idea that internet is free, right? So you can go from one place to another and you can freely read. There's Wikipedia, there's a lot of resources that are free. And now internet is moving more towards paywalled version, and you see that newspapers are doing online this quite frequently at this point. So we have an opportunity to redefine how we consume and how we pay for consuming digital goods and digital content. And I think that's where the collect feature comes. And explaining that to creators and users that come outside of Web3 is the most exciting thing, because it's really, every time I explain what a collect is, it gives me opportunity to think of like how we're going to consume digital content in the future, and using collect as a kind of like a tool for that.
That's awesome. And also for a lot of the content creators, this is something that they already understand, because for them this is their livelihood, and now they just get to maximize the way the weights are distributed between a Web2 platform and Web3, and that should also click immediately for a lot of them. Is it, whether it's from kind of your research to talking to your users, do you feel like making every social behavior transaction deters them from using it? Like the fact that I can tweet something and not care what happens to the content if it becomes popular or not is it a feature or like a thing something should be neutral to, or does it matter that I know that I liked it and I can sign for the fact that this individual has appreciated or collected or liked something?
I do think that the collects are a very high signal of appreciation of the content or creativity or membership or something else. So it definitely has a value. But also I think a social media network could work pretty well without even the monetization part as well. I think I think for us what's important is to create different kinds of tools that somehow support some of capitalization of the value that you create. Mainly, like primarily for the reason that we want everyone to appreciate more content. And by creating a network where you're able to value more and your audience can value more what you're doing and also paying for consuming the content, that creates a clear indication of how valuable your creativity also is and helpful. And I think that the bigger issue isn't actually the monetization. It's also like the design space now in Web2 social and in the internet in general is very limited. It's very limited to the attention as a commodity. And you can see that every single social media application, they track daily active users, monthly active users, weekly, and the stickiness. And I think it's just like that by itself limits you to create applications where you're trying to get the users to, just open the application and spend time as much as possible. And basically then you can charge more for ads and for that attention that they create. But I think you can actually build more interesting things besides that. And if there's better monetization tools in general, working in the background without anyone needing to worry about that, the builders and the creators, they can actually create applications that they have a new experience. So maybe you will open the application once a week, but it's still one of the most valuable apps that could be ever built online, because of the fact that you don't need to rely on the same metrics and the same attention span, but you have actually something new and you have a bigger design space for that. And I think that's where we're trying to push towards that. You're not limited also on selling the attention, but you have this open design space for capturing value. And even without monetization, the fact that you have this ownership for your audience, you can do new things that you couldn't do before, or you weren't motivated to do so.
And just unlocking new behavior is a pretty good sign of a platform. What are some of the things that you worry about as you think about making Lens more publicly available, or as you review more pull requests? What are things that concern you, or future things?
Well, something that is very interesting is that building something as what Lens is very. It's also kind of like challenging because you can't do everything right away. You have certain steps, and you want to grow. You want to grow the audience and the community in a way where it's cultivated well, and you have the right stakeholders to decide, how the protocol will function in the future, how things like trust and safety is implemented. I personally think something very cool, if someone is hacking during this hackathon, is that could create some sort of adapters or like algorithms for choosing trust and safety policy. I could imagine that giving that right all the way to the users to choose what kind of policies they want to get subscribed towards could be very cool. And also other thing is like at some point, like if the AI continues to get trained, like where where the difference comes between like a real user and an actual bot that is behaving like pretty much like a normal user, and even more, like you will have very sophisticated bots. And what do we do? Like, how do we resolve this challenge? Like, do we treat them as like normal users, or is it weird to talk to a AI bot that, you know, is actually quite nice bot to talk to? So those are like very like scary and freaky things, but they're coming very soon. So that's why, like, we in the Lens
this weekend.
This weekend, probably, yeah, I'm pretty sure. And that's why we need a lot of smart people to you know, be in the Lens community and help on giving inputs. And this is the first time ever I've seen like the community being built within the application. Normally, you go into a forum. So on Aave, with the Aave DAO and the Aave protocol, you have very active community forum that people are going towards and talking about changes. But also in Lens, the actual ideas are happening on Lens itself, which is quite cool because people are actively talking about you know, how to manage bots, how to, for example, think about trust and safety, moderation, you know, what could be interesting improvements in the protocol, or what could be built. So it's all happening in the application, in the network itself, which is quite fascinating to see. But I'm also like, what else I'm scared? So I'm also scared that, you know, we get the wrong picture about what we are trying to achieve with Web3 social, because end of the day, like the outcomes work when you have good implementation and good messaging on what you're trying to build. Last thing that I'm afraid is that if everyone is keep building like Twitter clones, that's also, it's not gonna come into a good outcome. I know like there's other protocols that are, or I would say like other kind of solutions that are always targeting similar activities. So I would like to see a lot of new kind of experiences as well.
I think that's a great segment to my next question was, which is, there's a lot of founders in the audience, there's a lot of people thinking about making more consumer and social apps. What advice do you have for them as they think about kind of embarking on that journey? Is it just about a good user experience, or do we need to think about something else? How would you approach in 2023 starting a consumer crypto company?
I think even like there's a big portion of like a consumer algorithms that could be built, and I think like the most coolest thing to do is to use the blockchain and AI together to build something valuable for the user. And the thing about blockchain or something like Lens protocol is that all the data is it's public, so there's a democratic way to compute on that data, which is like amazing. And that means that you can actually build any kind of an algorithm for the end users. And because the platform is open, you have incentives to actually build a good algorithm that is useful for the end users. And I usually call, I have this concept that I call like being a liquid citizen. It means that, for example, that in Web3, there isn't really much of a moat because the users can move from one protocol to another easily. You can delegate voting power from one person to another. You know, you can support another community by swapping your bags. So like there is little moat, which is good for the end users because there's an incentive to build good things. So what's exciting is that building algorithms which are beneficial for the consumers, that then help those who are building the actual user interfaces and doing the actual design part, they can actually benefit. And if you build an interesting algorithm or a module into the Lens protocol, it can be consumed across all the clients or whoever integrates the protocol. And that shows like the power of distribution and what you could actually do. So that's like one big consumer area. to focus upon. And then applications or use cases where you don't need to use the application every day. Creating a successful application that you need to open once a month, once a week, could be very fascinating outcome. And making it as a successful social media application could be super interesting for like the whole big social media narrative. Yeah, and the last thing is that just integrating Lens into somewhere where you couldn't expect, like socializing something. So something we notice in our team is that blockchain is very transactional, financial transactions, but being able to integrate social into existing Web3 infrastructure is very cool, because if you're able to use Lens to increase engagement in somewhere outside of social by adding a social layer, that could be very cool thing to do.
And a lot of these are also cool hackathon projects. We're getting ready to wrap this talk up. So if anybody has any questions for Stani, we can. I ask you to kind of come here and come to the mic. We get to do a few questions before we kind of do the next talks. But in the meantime, as people are coming, my one other question to you is: are there still any misconception about the infrastructure? Like, are we able to make a consumer app that can have 10,000 or 100,000 users, or are we still behind on more scalability solutions needed, or the solutions that do exist are incapable or not able to handle the current load?
No, that's a great question, because if you need to use everything that is on chain as an infrastructure, you will limit the scalability there. We're basically a few months away where you can do 50,000 transactions in a second.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so that's actually very cool, because we're able to use an infrastructure that is basically uses data availability. So the thing with blockchain is that you get execution and data availability as a package, but in some cases you might just need one of the sides. And it works well with non-financial transactions quite well. So that scaling is pretty much behind the corner. And then the second thing is like making the experience more smoother for newcomers who do not have yet this Web3 experience. And that's something that we're also thinking and working on.
And those are the Gasless and abstractions that you talked about that helps.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right, I think we have a couple of questions here. Please just go for it.
Really love this conversation. I have a question about people that are not in this room, who are the tastemakers. It is really difficult, in my opinion, to get people that influencing culture right now to be interested in blockchain, because once one thing goes wrong, NFTs, rug pulls, anything else, language in general, turns them off from the idea of investing in this field long term. So I'm wondering, the concept that you're describing seems like a pretty great solution for content creators to transition out of just investing in Web2 platforms and starting to build their own thing. So what would be a really good advice to make this palatable for them to get interested?
That's a very good question, because what we have noticed that a lot of the people who are in the space from that creativity and perspective and create culture and create a lot of exciting things, they're very early in the state that you have a lot of bottlenecks in the experience as well, and the usability isn't there. And that's what we've seen as well. So we've seen that the audience that is on Lens, for example, it's pretty much Web3 audience. It consists a lot of from creators as well. So we have a lot of music creators, artists, but they have over excitement about Web3 that got them into the space. And the hardest part is actually like how we cross line for people and creators that necessarily don't want to do the same technical heavy lift or learning curve and get onboarded quickly, and to do it in a more scaled way. And I personally think there's two things. Obviously, one is the idea that we can make the experience easier. That's where something like account abstraction and being able to come with your email, create a profile, and everything is abstracted away. So we already abstracted away paying for gas, abstracted away signing transactions. We have to abstract a way of creating or seeing a wallet address as well, or even thinking about networks. We just need to abstract everything away behind of the scenes. And that's actually not a big thing to do. That's very easy, to be honest. And I think the next thing is that we need to show the value that comes actually when you're using something like Lens, and you know that you actually have an audience, and what it means when you can actually have ownership of the relationship that you create, and also direct monetization, and how you can get high signal. And something I noticed about Lens, which surprised me, is that because it's a small network at this point and concentrated audience, you can have a higher signal between the peers. So people who get excited about what you create, and especially or discuss, can be found surfaced relatively easily, and that's why we see a lot of comments about that the users are getting more engaged content, and more engagement on the content. I don't know if it sticks as the protocol grows down the line, but also like those upsides is something that the creators should basically have. So I think the user usability, and the second is that being able to seeing value where you can create a content with 5 other people, and then that content becomes very valuable, and you can share that upside monetization with whoever was involved is a very big thing. Basically using the on-chain infrastructure to settle the transactioning of all the content that you create and the whole content supply chain.
Maybe a simple kind of question in addition to what you said is like, do they need to know there's crypto-powered features in this or no?
Kind of no, because I think you really can move a lot of things away. But what you can signal is that what guarantees they're getting. So, if there's new technology underlying the applications they're using, what is the benefit there? So, being able to share those benefits is valuable. I think it goes same way with NFTs, for example. It's important to explain that it's verified content. There's timestamps can't be changed and whatnot, and there's this programmability, but you don't need to do like all the layers, but enough to actually say like, why is this so valuable and important? Just like the surface, we and I mean all of us, like we're very bad at actually coming up with terms and explaining things as a community. So we need to get better on the messaging. We should be less naive because we get really tired of like explaining like things in a simple way. We feel very comfortable when we can find other people that we can talk in the same jargon and language, and we feel privileged as well. It's just like I feel so bad sometimes because we have a lot of technicality, but it doesn't get us anywhere if we can't like explain things very easily. And this is everywhere in technology. So you always need to build a bridge. And I think, the car industry is quite an interesting example, even before Henry Ford. So before the mass production of cars, they came up with things like horsepower. They named cars after horses and basically said that this is like an upgrade of a previous thing that they owned or had. So that is where we have to work with the community a bit more and just kind of like take the effort of explaining things and coming up with language that is easy as well.
Thank you.
Amazing. Do we have 2 more questions? Go for it.
Hey, thank you for all the work you're doing around bringing the hard problems of social networks to the masses and jailbreaking from the silos. I noticed a number of patterns in what you were talking around. I've personally spent a lot of time on digital identity, and as you said, language is where it's at. One of the key design principles I've heard, which feels like a really good lens, if you will, is agents, languages, and perspectives. And as a core ontology, big word, sorry, to basically be able to interact with any layer of the stack. Have you come across Nicholas Luck's work on perspectivism yet?
No.
Have you any thoughts about how to address the number of ontologies that or perspectives in a given room in an integrated fashion?
No, but so the good thing about my my job is that, like, I try to solve as many of the challenges we have, but the good thing is that I really don't need to solve all of them, and it's actually better if I don't have to, because I think that the problems we're trying to solve as a team and as a community are bigger than, like, they're bigger than us, in short, meaning that we need people in the community to talk about various different things and being able to contribute. And if those topics become more, they get more elevated because they're meaningful challenges, they should be then solved in a more like a whole community scale, in my opinion. And I think it's a good thing because it means that, you know, anyone can contribute, but also like start solving a meaningful problem. You know, it's the same thing that I was doing with Aave and Decentralized finance. So I always had a passion about finance, and during these years it actually grew even stronger. But my actual background never was finance. Neither I have anything to do with in terms of like academic background in social. But what is interesting is that you can ignite some of these projects and starting to solve some of these problems, and then you can get people who are have that and I would say like enthusiasm, but also some sort of a passion of solving and contributing in some ways. And I think one thing I like to see more is that all of these interesting challenges coming up within Lens Protocol, and you know, people can actually talk about them openly. And I think there's where we can actually solve a lot of the things, because we don't really have an answer to everything, and that's where we need more people to contribute to. That's my short answer.
Thank you.
It's one of the two hardest problems in computer science are cache invalidation and naming things, and we're going to figure out one at a time here.
Hi, Stani. Thank you for sharing a potential of Web3 social media and Lens. I would like to have your views on gasless transactions. We are builders as well as users of Lens. It's very frictionless, but at the end, someone has to pay gas fees, right? So how like sustainable it is in long run?
That's a good question. So a lot of the transaction doesn't necessarily need to happen on chain, which means that you can decrease the cost of the transactioning to a fraction what it is today, which is great. And I actually think that the gas cost boils down to the idea in a protocol like Lens is that what is the actual cost that you have, or a price tag you have to put to prevent spam, or any kind of like a very content that doesn't necessarily have a wide audience or audience at all. So that's one thing, and how to minimize that cost in various different things. Cool thing about the blockchain is that you have a lot of data available. In fact, the way we build the on-chain infrastructure is that it's public. So pretty much like everyone has a balance sheet at this point, and depending on how much you transact on chain, that's valuable data to decrease the cost of something like Sybil attacks or spam and whatnot. So eventually there might be some sort of still cost associated to that, but whoever pays it should be the one who captures the value out of it. So something that was super surprising to me is that the actual user isn't the one only that captures value. So there's users, there's algorithms, there's clients, there's the protocol itself, there's modules, because someone can create a module into the Aave protocol that is kind of like part of the protocol, but also it's external module that can capture value. And somehow we need to figure out of this like a feedback loop which elements will be paying. I personally think what will happen is that we'll see like a middleware where you will have this kind of dispatcher similar that we're running at Aave, which is actually permissionless, anyone can fund, but you can create one of those and whitelist users for some reputation, for example, and provide gasless transactions, but you have some sort of a value capture mechanism there as well.
We just saw Safe announce sponsored gas and abstraction through 4337, and I think we're getting to a point where, at least I think one way of thinking about this would be, if you are a client on top of any of these networks, this could be a good replacement for your infrastructure costs, which now doesn't come into play, and that plus the role of technologies we're seeing, the way we get to do batch a lot more transactions, just keep data availability, which you talked about, also helps us sort of get anywhere from 10 to 1,000x, if not more, reduction into fees. But
yeah, because we still have an infrastructure cost today that all the applications we're using, it's going to be close to the same. So at end of the day, at some point, it's more about like, what is the cost of matching a user with an audience, basically, and discovery. So it's a very open, as you see, like some of these topics are very widely open, and I personally think a lot of these things can be solved by experimentations, and we can try different things. That's the beauty of Lens. Everyone can actually contribute in solving some of these challenges, and it actually there might be multiple solutions to the same thing. Actually, the same way as we have multiple clients for running the Ethereum software and contributing to the network. And I think something similar will happen with Lens.
Thank you.
amazing. Well, Stani, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today, and really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kartik. Thank you, everyone.